Hello and welcome to Writing and Illustrating Children's Picture Books with me, Christian Fox. Now, if you've seen any of the other videos in this series, you'll know this is 30 essential children's books I think you should be aware of if you're intending to write or illustrate for children. At least have a sort of passing awareness. It's a good sort of cheat sheet to get you going. If there are books on the list you don't recognise, maybe goes for those first, and revisit some of your own favourites and sort of expand your choices from there. Now, these aren't necessarily the ones I consider to be the best children's books of all time, and they're not my personal favourites. They're just the ones I refer to most in all the classes I teach, whether that's at university level, whether it's the online courses I teach, the video-based courses I teach, or whether it's in one-to-one workshop sessions. Now, because there are 30 books in the list, that would be a lot to get through in a single video, so I've split them into easy groups of 3 groups of 10 for you. The classical market, which is from the sort of dawn of children's books, 1850 up to around 1950s. Then there's that sort of very rich middle period from the 1950s up to the end of the 1970s, leading up to from around the beginning of the 1980s up to present day, the contemporary market. And I'm going to concentrate today, we're starting on the middle ground market, and a book I think you should all be aware of, or a series of books I think you should all be aware of. It's Dick Bruna's Miffy. Now, one of the reasons I like Miffy so much is it's that when I hold up a Miffy book in the classes I teach and say, when do students expect that was first published? The usual guesses are 1970s perhaps, even into the 80s, possibly the 90s. Now, whether that's on the back of something like the popular Japanese Hello Kitty range, I don't know, but it actually came out first in 1955. It was startlingly different to everything that had gone before. If you think of things that had traditionally gone before, we'd had the Beatrix Potters, the Winnie the Poohs, only sort of 20, 30 years before. Very, very traditional children's books. And then something like Miffy came along, which was fantastically different to everything else. This was the first example of a kind of graphic designer's children's book. Bruna had a really fantastic eye for graphic design, for character design, for everything else. He wanted to do something different in the sort of size of the book, the colours in the book, and everything else. Now, Bruna grew up in the Netherlands. He was a Dutch artist who was very influenced. He grew up at the same time as the Stijl movement, and if you don't know what that is, take a look online. He was influenced by the Cubists, by Matisse particularly, all those collage works Matisse did in his later years, those sort of stark areas of bold flat colour contrasted with the white space. The Cubist paintings of the Modernist paintings of Mondrian, the Rietveld house. Gerrit Rietveld was an architect, again very influential in the Stijl movement, and from the same area as Dick Bruna. He built a whole house that was all these beautiful parallel black lines and primary colours and strong areas of white space. Bruna grew up in a publishing family. His family owned a publishing house. He was expected to go into the family business. He became a graphic designer and commercial artist. He wanted to be a painter, went to the Amsterdam School of Art and found he didn't really have a feel for painting, and did end up going into the family business of publishing, doing mostly posters. I believe he did around 2,000 posters and book covers for the family business. But then one day, after seeing a rabbit and having had a child of his own, he thought, I will have a go at a children's book and see what happens. But because of the influences he'd been exposed to, he decided he wanted to produce this sort of very modernist or postmodernist children's book and see whether that kind of artistic language would work in a children's book. Now, it was startlingly successful, startlingly different. It wasn't necessarily right first time. The very first Miffy illustrations weren't as pure as the later books. You can see Miffy's ears are going a different direction. He's trying different poses. The typography, although it's very sort of, again, modernist, very de Stijl, it's all in caps. It's very kind of stark. Again, very different to anything that had gone before. Even the format in these early books is rectangular. The later ones were all square. So he hadn't necessarily found his style at that point. That's another page I've printed off from one of the very, very first books he did. Again, this sort of rectangular format. This is 2 pages side by side. And later on, he went for whole body figures in most of the illustrations. This is an earlier example. The mouths are a bit different, and he hadn't quite perfected that kind of purely graphic style. It wasn't really until 1963 that Miffy was this kind of perfect distillation of graphic design, of the de Stijl, of this sort of Bauhaus influence. If you see these very, very early books, even the typography, he was trying a serif font here, and it's black against blue. It doesn't really work. By 1963, we've got these very, very pure books. He's kind of got the formula absolutely right in these very, very later books. Well, not very, very later, 1963. So what's that? That's 8 years after the first one came out. But by that point, they were more or less set. He'd set the style, and that was how the Miffy books stayed until the end of production. Now, Bruna was very, very careful with the artistic style of Miffy. He wasn't interested in the commercialization of the character. That wasn't his primary motivation. His motivation was really to produce a work of art, to relieve his frustrations at not having been a great painter. He wanted to produce a great children's book. His contribution was to produce the artistic children's book, if you like, the representation of this postmodern movement. Now, everything about Miffy, the whole modernist concept, the simplicity of the character, if you take a look at the 2 dots for the eyes, all he had to work with for Miffy's expression was the 2 dots. And by the time he perfected the formula, these 2 dots and this cross for a mouth. If you look at the earlier ones again, you can see that they were more complicated, but by the time he'd perfected the formula. Now, he claimed that he would spend 2 hours or more just on the distance between these dots, the size, the tiny difference in size of these dots, whether they were slightly extended in that direction or that direction, how much that cross was compressed or extended for the mouth would affect Miffy's expression on the page. The interior of the artwork, the compositions, the interior with the white space alongside for the text. He didn't incorporate the text within the illustrations. He didn't really get involved in double page spreads. They're all like mini posters. They're all little individual works of art. For Bruna, it was really about the creation of the book as a piece of artwork. He wasn't particularly interested in the sort of crass commercialization of the whole thing. Now, the Japanese took a slightly different approach. They wanted to have a character like Miffy that could really exploit the merchandise. I can't remember the name of the company. I'm going to put the name of the company on the screen. But they were primarily interested in a Miffy character of their own. They created Hello Kitty, and I think it was 1974. Bruna himself is often mistakenly confused as a Japanese artist, but it was all Dutch. He hand painted all these lines. If you look closely, I know you won't be able to see it on the camera, but take a closer look at these lines. You'll see that they're all hand painted. He was very meticulous about how he painted these lines. They're not computer generated. They don't have that kind of sterility that the Japanese versions do. The Japanese created Hello Kitty not as a series of books. It was purely a merchandising opportunity to apply that character to backpacks, to stickers, to stationery, to greetings cards, and all that kind of thing. And the Bruna publishing firm eventually had to take the Japanese to court over infringement of their copyright. So Bruna was very, very protective and very meticulous about the fact that it was all about the artwork. I need to emphasize that I'm recommending these books, it's probably obvious by now, for illustrators. Okay, this is a fantastic example of character design and how characters can be applied, and the minimalism, the minimalist style and everything else. They're fantastic examples of how primarily graphic designers can produce children's books, but for all illustrators they provide a great lesson in minimalism, particularly for the younger age groups. There isn't a lot in the Miffy stories. They're not great stories, so there's not a lot for writers to learn. So I'm really recommending these for the illustrators. But Miffy, as a sort of genre in itself, as part of in the whole world of children's books, Miffy stands alone as sort of a unique prospect. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, if you found it useful, take a look at the other free videos on YouTube on essential children's books and on other subjects to do with children's books. Give me a like, comment in the section below, either on this video or subjects for other videos you'd like to see me make about the subject of children's books. Take a look at the website. If you'd like to go further, take a look at the website about the children's book writing and illustration courses I offer. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.